Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my great apologies for being a little late. It's been a crazy day. First off, I want to thank both of our witnesses for attending this hearing. This actually follows on our hearing of last June on the RFS. In that hearing, we discussed at length issues we saw with the EPA's management of the program and the statute. And I'm glad EPA took our words to heart. And that just last week, the RFS is back on track and hit the levels required by law for calendar year 2017 for most fuels. They even increased the volumes for biofuels and advanced biofuels. So thank you, Ms. McCabe, for your good work on that. We were grateful. Wish it would have come a little earlier, but you know, we'll take it when we can get it. Of course, EPA didn't meet the statutory levels for some advanced biofuels, allegedly because of the lack of production. And we want to hear more about that, and that really is what generated this discussion today. Senator Ernst and I noted last June that such delays in setting up the program and in setting annual volume obligations really did lead to stalled investments in advanced biofuels. And so had we had more certainty in the marketplace, we could have actually, I think, seen the kind of investment that it would have taken to get that product into the market. So the reports that we're reviewing today don't necessarily come as a surprise. GAO found that we won't meet some of the statutory targets for advanced biofuels on greenhouse gas or greenhouse gas reductions, two measures which arguably and do go hand in hand. Again, this isn't surprising or even new, as we acknowledged at last year's hearing. It was part of the disruption that we saw in the marketplace as a result of uncertainty from earlier decisions. Fortunately, the authors of the RFS made contingency plans if EPA ever found the industry wasn't ready to meet these targets, and the law allows EPA to reduce those annual obligations. This is why having annual rules setting is helpful, though it also brings a level of uncertainty. We can't adjust course when it's absolutely necessary. The authors put in place authorities for EPA to rewrite the statutory levels through reset authority, and I look forward to discussing that here today with both of our witnesses. So I look forward to hearing from the witnesses and discussing how we can work together with the industry and the administration. And certainly note that President-elect Trump supports the RFS, and we all know how important that is to markets and to certainty for our farmers. So we are grateful that you're both here. This will be an ongoing and continuing subject of discussion, but if you are going to be for all of the above, this is a key component to an energy policy that helps us diversify our energy sources moving into the future. Congress was wise when they first enacted it, providing these incentives. Want to see that these incentives work. And so thank you, Ms. McCabe. Thank you, Mr. Rousseau, for being here. Look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questions, just want to just ask that the letter that I'm going to hand to you is, in fact, introduced into the record. It is signed by a number of groups who frequently don't find their names on the same letter. They're suggesting and expressing their unified position in opposition of efforts by petitioners to move the point of obligation in compliance. You know, you get API and the RFA on the same letter. That's pretty remarkable. So
without
I think that might speak some volumes in terms of answering the petition. Obviously, we hope that you give full consideration, but these interest groups have been long involved in this, and for them to share a common opinion might put a little more weight on what they're doing or what they're suggesting. So I think we're all trying to get a handle on how we don't have this happen again, where the market is unresponsive or is in a position of uncertainty given the lack of certainty on where we're headed in terms of numbers. And so in order to prevent that from happening again, I think we have to better understand why the market didn't respond and come to numbers that were adequate to meet the quotas or meet the levels. So I guess my first question would be for you, Mr. Rusko. In your opinion, what was the most significant contributor to the delay in advanced biofuels production? Was it delays in setting up the RFS program initially, uncertainty related to the RVOs, uncertainty from the litigation and what I believe was flawed reading of the statutory waivers, or was it really more about tax uncertainty? Or was it something altogether? And in your opinion, in the work that you did, do you believe that had we maintained a level of statutory certainty or certainty in meeting those statutory requirements, we would have seen the level of investment that would have been able to meet the standards?
I think that it's pretty clear from most of the people that we spoke with, including producers of advanced biofuels and researchers in that area, that sort of the biggest issue is the price of oil. So if the price of oil is very high, then there's going to be more investment in alternatives to that. And when the price was high a number of years ago, even some oil companies were diversifying and investing in biofuel technology. But when the bottom fell out of the market for oil, and also with reductions and slower growth since then of motor fuel demand in the United States, investors just looked at biofuels as not as viable an investment as other things, so money flowed elsewhere. I do think that in the margin, things like regulatory uncertainty and uncertainty about tax credits do play a role, but what we've found is that for example, cellulosic ethanol, which is probably the most likely advanced biofuel to be technologically and commercially ready in the near to midterm, it will require multiple generations of plants to achieve the kinds of efficiencies that might bring it down to where it's commercially viable. But that also then depends on the underlying price of motor fuels. And so that's, I think, is the biggest.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, that a lower price competitor can drive investment someplace else and cause people a lot of concern, but so can regulatory uncertainty. And I think when we look at advanced, just not to put a fine point on it, but this is a building block industry. As you look at other potential available growth in advanced manufacturing for ag products. I used to say, well, we want to move beyond food, fiber, and fuel. And the pushback I always got is that this technology that can be developed and the plants that can be developed really provide the building block for other opportunities, whether it's styrofoam or whether it is, seat covers or all of that begins at this level of innovation. And so I think there is beyond all of the above energy policy that really works for the United States and gives us the diversity in our fuel choices. We have to realize that this is also technology that is very transferable to other kinds of renewable manufacturing. And it's critical as we look kind of into the future of how we utilize natural resources, especially the natural resource that the soils and the stuff that we grow in our country. So we're hopeful that we will have consistency now going forward, which will lead to predictability. But I want to get to the Reset Authority. I only have so much time, and I think it's important that we remember that the Reset Authority, when we have this discussion around reports and not meeting advanced fuel mandates, just because for a variety of reasons we don't meet the targets doesn't mean the law is either a failure or needs amendment. We have a process in place to sort or correct if necessary. I think Ms. McCabe, the 2007 law that Congress passed included the reset provision to allow EPA to adjust the RFS mandates after 2016 if the volume totals in the table had gone below the law by 20% in 2 consecutive years or by 50% in 1 year. Has this authority been triggered for any of the tables in the law today? And since the authority, I guess I would just like you to explain where you see the reset authority today and the likelihood of reset, and if what role this disruption played in getting to the reset authority.
So just to explain what Congress laid out, you got it exactly right, 20% in 2 years or 50% in 1 year. So those levels have been triggered for cellulosic and for advanced, but not for total. And so the agency has not, and we're just finishing 2016, the agency has not embarked upon a reset rule. We of course, are paying close attention to it. A couple of things are going on that cause us to think really hard about how to proceed with that. One is the idea of moving forward with 1 or 2, but not all of the volume standards seems like it could be very disruptive to the market because of the careful balance that Congress established with the relationship of those nested standards. We also still have some ongoing uncertainty because of pending litigation about our authorities with respect to the waiver in particular, but other things as well. So we have not hit even the first year trigger for total. So it would be at least 2 more years before that all 3 would be triggered, and that's kind of where we are with the reset.
Yeah, and we don't want a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is the reset happens because we've reset. So, Mr. Roscoe, was this reset discussed by your panelists, and would the reset not make the report on not meeting increasing targets moot since the law already addresses this?
It did come up, but it's, so our report just is focused on what is likely to be available in terms of how much volumes will be available, not necessarily whether or not the industry will be in compliance.
We keep talking in circles because one of the problems that we have and that we've had from the beginning is what's available depends on regulatory certainty. And I recognize the marketplace, and we're a big producer of oil, so we understand what's happening with oil. But, you know, the frustration for me is that we say, well, what's available, what's available? What's available is going to depend on what there's capital investment for, and whether there's capital investment and innovation is going to depend on regulatory certainty. So we're in this kind of spiral that deeply concerns me. And I'm wondering, when you discussed the reset, was this, you know, well, what if we hadn't had regulatory uncertainty? What if these targets had remained available? We would then have the ability to amp up and meet the requirements under the law or the targets under the law.
So I don't think that we heard a lot of people say that if EPA had maintained the statutory targets, that they would have been met. I don't think anybody said that. What they did say is that going forward, reducing regulatory uncertainty improves marginally the investment climate. But I think that they also did not say that would sort of fix the problem, and there wouldn't be that there would be adequate investment to
Where they
there.
would have been likely to say $100 a barrel will fix the investment problem. They weren't willing to say, you know, $40 to $50 a barrel with regulatory uncertainty was not causation for the problem.
Well, in the report where we talked about R&D and the sort of state of science, they're just well up the curve on commercialization and bringing costs down. They're far above
Right.
the market rate. They're many years from that under the most optimistic scenarios. So it's, even if you threw money at it, a lot of money at it, which right now there isn't a lot of money being thrown at this, you would be many generations of plants, even for the already sort of commercial scale operations. You're many generations away from achieving the efficiencies that are available, and their current the current cost at which they can produce is so high that you would need many generations in order to bring those costs down, if it's possible at all. And so
So the discussion really went to technological impossibility at this point in time.
not impossibility, but that it's just far away from the cost currently, given the state of technology, is very, very much higher than a market competitive price of motor fuels.
Well, I think we're going to have an ongoing discussion, given that we've reached the date trigger on the reset. And I know the chairman has been discussing this quite a bit. And we need to live in reality, I get that, but we also need to understand that this was designed to create an environment, a regulatory environment, and a certainty, a regulatory certainty that would grow investment and grow technology. And I think we've missed a couple years here because of the uncertainty that's been in the market. Mr. Chairman, I think that we should always have a willingness to think about and reopen and explore new ideas on how we can do things better. I do dispute somewhat the notion that the only value that the mandate has had is, those expressed in the statute itself, which is greenhouse gas, which is looking at energy independence. I think that a variety of fuel sources, especially in transportation fuel, that up to this point, there hasn't been the diversity that we've seen. We're seeing more electric cars. We're seeing more compressed natural gas as natural gas prices stay low, especially in fleet vehicles, especially in locomotives. Burlington Northern had a big project converting to compressed natural gas when we saw that differential between natural gas prices and oil prices, diesel prices. So I think that one of the problems that we always have in this country is that we make decisions based on too short of a frame of our history. And I think that it was Congress's judgment that incentivizing and providing a market for biofuels was essential for our long-term economic well-being. Both in terms of transportation fuels, but as I said in the past, in terms of developing technology, which really can be extraordinary as we go to the next generation of advanced manufacturing as it relates to agricultural products. We move beyond fuel, fiber, and food, and we go into using this as a base for growth long-term, growth in advanced manufacturing and value-added manufacturing in agriculture. So I get what you're saying, and I get that we need to have a broader discussion, but I also think that we haven't had the time, given the disruption that we've had in looking at this and the marketplace and fluctuations in oil prices, to really see this experiment and to really see this whole system from a big picture, mile-high beneficial value. And so where I don't disagree with you, Mr. Chairman, that, a 10-cent, if in fact you and I could agree on that number, a 10-cent cost to consumers is something we need to take very seriously, because it's in aggregate very high. But then what's the benefit to the economy long-term, and not just in a 5 or 6 year window, but in a 20, 30, 40-year window? And not to get on my high horse here, but well familiar with a facility called Great Plains Natural Gas. I was served on their board of directors. It's a syngas. It was a 1970s project that was done in response to the oil embargo, where we looked at what is our fuel that is abundant in this country, and we saw a lot of coal. We said, well, how about we gasify coal, because we think we're going to be in a natural gas shortage. So we went about that, and eventually the consortium that made the investment bowed out because we deregulated natural gas. Natural gas prices literally went below $1 an MCF. We found that we had too much natural gas in the market. Again, a market manipulation that really was not reflecting true market conditions. But that facility chugged away, looking at byproducts, looking at how we could be part of the CO2 discussion with CO2 injection. And as a result, now we have a facility that has has created huge economies in gasification of coal, which could in fact lead to CO2 reductions overall as it relates to kind of the global economy. And so how long did that take? The facility went online in '84. And here we are 30 years later, really having a meaningful discussion about the value of that facility. And so I just think that there is a real impulse in this country to look so short-sighted in terms of the time period. And these technologies can be extraordinarily important. And there is an incentive beyond just simply transportation fuels that I think need to be considered. Now, obviously, we have to go with the statute we have, which identifies what those goals are. And so, you know, we will continue to have that discussion, but we also have to have the statute being enforced the way the statute was intended to really evaluate the economic success. And, you know, this won't be the first time the chairman and I, certainly not the first time the chairman and I have disagreed about this subject, and it won't be the last. But I think that the issues that have been raised here are ongoing, and the issues that have been raised by the chairman are issues that we need to be stand ready to defend the statute as we look kind of going into the future. I am concerned about the reset button. I am concerned that that creates more uncertainty into the market, and that because we've had this earlier market disruption, that as we look for investment, that's the sweet spot in all of this, and we don't want to hinder or encumber the development of those technologies too quickly. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my
That's your story, and you're sticking to it.
yeah, you got it.
Yeah. Well, I just would remind you that the Department of Energy gave a $500 million grant to do a cellulosic facility in Kansas that Shell just bought for $28 million recently because it just didn't prove to be viable long term. And they may very well use that $28 million and convert that into something else in the future that may be very viable, and I hope they do.
Yeah, and I would suggest that if you looked at the history of Great Plains, it's exactly that.
Yeah.
Federal loan guarantees that, you know, through negotiations, you know, pennies on the dollar back to the federal government. But I would maintain that facility on the prairie has enormous R&D benefit to our country, and so. I want to make a point about transparency in the RIN market. I think EPA has long recognized the potential for fraud and the concern about lack of transparency and volatility. You've implemented the quality assurance program. I don't think we should leave this subject without acknowledging that and at least getting some feedback from you on whether that quality assurance project has worked. But you've also been working with CFTC on a memorandum of understanding related to transparency and oversight. And so I don't know that we need to comment given our short period of time, but I did want to acknowledge the work that you're doing outside of this debate about, you know, who has the obligation to try and make the program more transparent, to try and work cooperatively with the CFTC to guarantee minimization of speculation and fraud.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. We are looking at those opportunities every day to try to provide more transparency.